In this video, we'll be looking at the cash cycle, which relates to the relationship between the accounts receivable turnover, accounts payable turnover, and inventory turnover. The cash cycle is about cash coming in and going out, involving inventory turnover, which is the average days taken for the business to sell inventory, either on cash or on credit. The accounts receivable turnover, which is the average days taken for the business to recover cash from the accounts receivable from credit sales. And lastly, accounts payable turnover, which is the average days taken for the business to pay the accounts payable for credit purchases of inventory. Here's a diagram of the cash cycle which explains the cash inflows and cash outflows relating to the sales and purchases of inventory, as well as receipts from accounts receivable and payments through accounts payable. For our first discussion, we're going to assume that all purchases and sales are on credit. Let's start with the purchase of inventory. The ITO, which is the inventory turnover, measures the number of days that it takes for the business to sell its inventory to the customers from the date the inventory was purchased. Because we are assuming that all sales are on credit, therefore it is also important to look at the ARTO, which is the accounts receivable turnover, that shows the number of days that it takes for the business to collect cash from the accounts receivable for any of the credit sales made. So what we can see here is that the number of ITO days plus the ARTO days will give us the total number of days that it takes for the business to recover cash from making any credit sales. On the other hand, the APTO, which is the accounts payable turnover, measures the number of days that it takes for the business to make payments to its accounts payable for the inventory purchased on credit. Therefore, how quick we receive cash from the credit sales is measured by the ITO plus ARTO. And how quick we pay cash out is measured by the APTO. Now let us have a look at a specific example. Here we have a purchase of inventory on credit. It takes the business an average of 20 days to sell the inventory to the customers from the time it was purchased. Since we are assuming that all inventory is sold on credit, we therefore also need to look at the accounts receivable turnover, which tells us the number of days that it takes on average to collect cash from the accounts receivable after the credit sale is made. So here we can see that in total, it takes 45 days to recover cash from selling inventory on credit to its customers. Now we're going to see how long it takes for the business to pay cash to its accounts payable for credit purchases. So here we have the purchase of inventory on credit, and what we can see here from the accounts payable turnover is that it takes the business an average of 50 days to pay cash to its accounts payable for the credit purchases of inventory. Now here's the question that we're going to address, which is to discuss the cash cycle of the business and the effects on the business cash flow. Note that all purchases and sales of inventory are on credit. Now, a question like this can typically be between 5 to 6 months. We're now going to see how we can use the WTF plus cause and effect structure to write a response to this question. So first, we start with the W, which is to address the what of the question. And we do this by providing definitions for each indicator provided, which includes the ITO, ARTO, and APTO. We then address the T, which is the trend. We ask, are the indicators slower or faster compared to the industry averages and credit terms? We also then comment on the F, which is favorable or unfavorable. We look at whether the indicators show favorable or unfavorable comparisons to industry averages and credit terms. We also need to look at the cause and effects. For the cause, we ask the question, what causes the business ITO, ARTO, APTO to be favorable or unfavorable for the business in comparison to the industry averages and credit terms? And for the effects, we ask, what are the effects on the business cash flow, which is the main focus here in this question. Let us start with the inventory turnover. The business takes an average of 20 days to sell the inventory. This is addressing the what of the question by providing a definition of the ITO. The ITO is slower than the industry average of 17 days, which is unfavorable to the business. Here, we've addressed the trend, where we've made the comparison to the industry average, and we've also addressed the F, where we've commented whether the comparison was favorable or unfavorable to the business. In this case, it was unfavorable. This may be due to inefficient management of the business in selling its inventory. That is the cause that we've identified. This negatively impacts the business cash flow, as slower sale of inventory means slower recovery of cash for the business. And that would be the effects that we're including in our discussion. And the effects are focused on the impacts on the cash flow. Let's move on to the accounts receivable turnover. The business takes an average of 25 days to recover cash from the accounts receivable for credit sales. That's the W. The ARTO is comparable to the industry average of 25 days, which is favorable to the business. That's the T and F right there. The ARTO is also faster than the credit terms of 30 days offered to customers, which is also favorable to the business. And another T and F here. This is because the business is efficient in collecting amounts owed by the accounts receivable. That's the cause. And lastly, this positively impacts the business cash flow, as faster recovery of cash from accounts receivable means faster cash inflow for the business. And that would be the effects on the business cash flow. Now we're going to discuss the accounts payable turnover. The business takes an average of 50 days to pay cash to accounts payable for credit purchases of inventory. That's a W. The APTO is slower compared to industry average of 47 days, which is unfavorable. That's a T and F there. However, the APTO is still faster than credit terms of 60 days offered by the accounts payable. This is still favorable to the business. Another T and F here. The above may be caused by the business having more struggles than other businesses in the industry in managing its repayments to the accounts payable. However, as the business is still making repayments within credit terms offered by its own accounts payable, there may not be any impacts on the business relationship with the accounts payable. That said, it is arguable that doing so puts pressure on the business cash flow in repaying the accounts payable much quicker than the given credit terms. Now in this last part here, I've basically weaved in the cause and effects. And slightly different to what we've done earlier with the ITO and ARTO. And this is because in this example here, we're trying to say that in comparison to the industry average, it may seem unfavorable, but technically based on the credit terms of 60 days that's offered by the accounts payable, the business is actually doing pretty well in making repayments within that credit term. And in fact, it is paying much quicker than the given credit terms. But what we should remember here is to always ensure that we are tying it back to the main focus of the question, which is here in this case, identifying the effects of this APTO on the cash flow. When discussing cash cycle, it is important for us to also discuss the timing of cash inflows compared to the timing of cash outflows. For the business, the timing of the cash inflows was 45 days, and we calculate this by taking the business ITO of 20 days plus the business ARTO of 25 days. The timing of the cash outflow of 50 days is basically represented by the business APTO. Let's look at what this means. The business takes an average of 45 days to recover cash from making credit sales and from collecting amounts owed by the accounts receivable. So that's the W there. The business takes an average of 50 days to pay cash to its accounts payable for credit purchases of inventory made. That's the W there as well. The timing of cash inflow is faster than the timing of cash outflow, which is favorable to the business. That's a T and F right here. This is caused by overall good management of the business in managing the timing of its cash inflows and cash outflows. That's the cause. And lastly, this is beneficial for the business overall cash flow, as the cash inflows are faster than the cash outflows. And that's the effects, in this case positive effects on the business cash flow. Here are different cash cycle examples that we should think about. The first example, where all purchases and sales are on credit, has been discussed. The second example is when all purchases are on credit and all sales are on cash. In this case, the timing of cash inflows is only indicated by the inventory turnover because we do not have accounts receivable. Another example is when all purchases are on credit and majority of the sales are on credit. In this case, the timing of cash inflows would be indicated by the inventory turnover as well as the accounts receivable turnover, which is quite important in this case because majority of the sales are still on credit. In this example, all purchases are on credit while majority of the sales are on cash. In this case, the timing of cash inflows will be largely indicated by the inventory turnover. This is because although we do have accounts receivable, it is quite minimal. Now we're going to look at analyzing the ITO. If we have a fast inventory turnover, this is usually a positive indicator. It means that we have higher sales, higher profits, and more cash on hand. It also means less inventory losses and write-downs due to effective inventory management. However, fast inventory turnover can also be a negative indicator if the inventory turnover is too fast. Perhaps the selling price is too low. This means that we're losing out on profits. Or is the business holding too little inventory? This means that there might be higher delivery costs for the business, or the business is losing out on bulk discounts. On the other hand, if we have a slow inventory turnover, it is usually a negative indicator because this means lower sales, lower profits, and less cash on hand. This also means more inventory losses and write-downs, and it's due to poor inventory management. There are also other things to consider when analyzing the ITO, such as what is the inventory type? If it is food, it is better for the ITO to be faster. Is the inventory cheap or expensive? For example, luxury cars usually have slower ITO than cheaper cars. What about the inventory lines? Which lines are selling well or poorly? Also, is there a changing trend? Note that inventory turnover is historical, and therefore we should perform the analysis alongside changing trends. Here are some strategies to improve the inventory turnover. The business should maintain an appropriate inventory mix and to ensure that it keeps up to date with the seasonal tastes, changing trends, and also to ensure that the inventory meets the community and legal standards. The business could also promote the sale of complementary goods to encourage more sales. The inventory should also be kept up to date with the latest trends and technology. Sometimes the businesses can also rotate the inventory. For perishable items such as food, the older inventory should be rotated to the front to minimize inventory from expiring. Also, the inventory might be moved to a better location to boost sales. The business should also ensure that it determines the appropriate level of inventory on hand so that it doesn't store too much to reduce the risk of inventory loss and damage. The business could also market the inventory strategically and effectively and ethically. Lastly, the business can appoint an inventory manager to help with the management of inventory. Here are some strategies to manage accounts receivable. The business could offer discounts to the accounts receivable to encourage quick settlement. The business could also send invoices promptly, as well as send reminder notices to the accounts receivable. Before offering credit options, the business should conduct extensive credit checks to ensure that the customers are able to make their repayments. The business could deny access to credit facilities to accounts receivable who are struggling with making repayments. The business could threaten legal action, but this should be the last resort. The business could also employ debt collection agencies or perhaps an accounts receivable officer to assist with the process of recovering amounts owed by the customers. It is also important that the business develops strong relationships with its customers. There are other non-financial information that should be considered, such as the customer's current business or personal circumstances, as well as the significance of the relationship that the business has with the customer. Here are some strategies to manage accounts payable. It is important for the business to develop strong relationships with the suppliers. The business should pay within, but as close as possible to the credit terms offered by the suppliers. If possible, the business should pay earlier to earn the discount that may be offered by the suppliers. The business should always check the statement of accounts against the individual accounts payable ledger accounts to ensure that the accounts are kept accurately. The business could also appoint accounts payable officers to assist with the process of making payments to the accounts payable. Some non-financial information should also be considered, such as the supplier's attitude towards their accounts receivables, as well as the relationship that the business might have with the suppliers. It is always important that the business communicates in a timely manner with its suppliers.